So 10 days ago, Lia Thomas became the first openly transgender athlete to win America's top trophy in university sports, swimming to victory in the women's 500-yard freestyle race. But this has become a very controversial issue, a lightning rod in the debate about trans women in sport. And it's been questioned by many sports stars, politicians, competitors, even teammates, parents. And there's been, of course, many protests, people saying that this gives people who've been through male puberty have a natural unfair advantage. And among the critics, we have the Olympic, European and Commonwealth medalist Sharron Davies, who says athletes have been silenced from voicing their honest concerns. And Sharron joins me now. Sharron, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. It's nice to speak to you at last.
Yes, it's lovely to have you on the show. I want to ask you about this because you've been very vocal in this debate. And I would say you've had a fair share of flack for doing so, because so many athletes and people in competitive sports are terrified of speaking out. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been speaking out now since, well, I suppose the last 3 years, really, since it's obvious how it's impacting. But the rule changed in 2015. So it wasn't in time for any transgender athletes to be in Rio. But we obviously had our first transgender athlete with Laurel Hubbard in the weightlifting in Tokyo. So it's kind of now, it's really beginning to reach the general public to actually see that it's ridiculous. That there is a difference between male and female athletes. That's why we have separate categories. Sport, by definition, is exclusionary. So, for example, if we had the under 10 race, we don't have 14-year-old boys in it. We only have under 10. In the Paralympic Games, we have many classifications. So someone that's missing both of their arms and both of their legs isn't racing with someone that has all of those limbs. In boxing, for example, we have weight categories. So all of these things are there to give people a level platform to be able to do sport. And that is the absolute reason why we have women's sport, because men otherwise would win everything. There is a difference of between 10 and 30% in Olympic sport. And that's absolutely huge, when medals are won by hundredths of a second. And these are people that are training, 10, 12 years of their life, in my case, 6 hours a day. And the difference between, making the final is minuscule. And we're expected to just give away 15%, and that's okay. And this only happens in women's sport because it doesn't go the other way. Transgender men, biological women, will not impact on male sport whatsoever. So it's just women that are expected to roll over and win their race and lose their races, And
when you say all this, it just sounds so reasonable, and yet it stirs such ire. You've had people say awful things about you for saying this, accuse you of hatred, transphobia, bigotry. How do you react to that, or how do you feel about that?
I've got to the point now, it's water off a duck's back, because those words are thrown at anyone that voices an opinion to try to shut everybody up. And it's very similar to your previous guest. And that's their agenda, that's their weapon, is literally to try to shut everybody up so that they just don't have any reasoning, any science. So 3 years ago, I got 60 of my friends that were all Olympic medalists and world medalists to write a letter to the IOC. And we just said, please, can you do the science first? We want inclusive sport, but we also want to protect sport for females too, because they deserve that. Can you do the science first? And they just totally ignored it. And many of those 60 have not stuck their head above the parapet, but a lot of people are doing things behind the scenes that you're not necessarily aware of.
But why is it that those in authority are just ignoring the science on this? Why would they do that? It doesn't seem to make sense.
Because we just seem to be going down this route that inclusion trumps fairness. And that's fine if you happen to be male, because for you it will benefit if you're male. But if you're female, then you lose out in every single direction, and so it's just incredibly frustrating. For example, again, the NC2A's competition that you talked about, in the same races with Lia, there was a transgender man who is a biological female who decided to swim with the women.
Right.
Because there was no point in swimming with the men, because they weren't going to win. So even the transgender males are still staying in the women's races. And again, at the Olympic Games, we had 2 non-binary athletes that competed in the women's events, not in the men's events.
Right.
So all of the evidence is there. and it just flabbergasts me. And I suppose I speak out because I was very much affected, along with a lot of my friends in the 70s and the 80s, with the GDR, drug doping system.
Yes.
And for 20 years, the IOC did absolutely nothing. And people now pretend as if we didn't know, but we absolutely knew at the time what was going on. And it was just allowed to happen, Olympics after Olympics.
And of course, fairness must be a priority for anyone who's involved in sport, and someone who's cheating with drugs. You have to tackle that, and there is a comparison to be made here. And yet, we keep hearing that young athletes, a lot of young athletes, feel that Lia Thomas's participation should be celebrated. I mean, how do you think this must be for younger athletes?
I don't know many athletes that say that. There are one or two, and a lot of those are involved in LGBT. So they're part of that community. Mm-hmm. I have athletes that ring me on a daily basis from all different sports, and coaches, and administration staff, and even doctors. And they are really distressed, and they want something done. They just don't know how to do it. So I don't know. For example, I just think we have to start standing up, athletes do have to start standing up, but they have been threatened very badly with losing their licenses to race, with losing their sponsorship, with losing their places on teams. Those athletes that spoke about Lia were threatened with losing their scholarships at university, and also being blacklisted for jobs going forward. So
from what you're
they
describing,
were very, very frightened, those girls.
So what you're describing suggests to me that there is very much a consensus among people within sport that this is unfair, that the science makes it absolutely clear, but it's a climate of fear. So the reason why it's being allowed to continue is that people just simply are it's for self-preservation. You don't speak up because you've seen what happens to the people who do. Is that a fair analysis?
Yeah, so when Lia won her medal, there was total silence in the swimming pool. And when the girl that came second touched, the swimming pool erupted and everybody clapped. And so the consensus is not that they're celebrating Lia's success. So I also feel quite sorry for her, because this isn't her choice. This is the rules that are there. They're very bad rules, but she's just using those rules. I would like to see those athletes maybe compete in an open category where we can celebrate them, and then a protected female category, because anything else I think becomes extremely difficult to govern. It becomes very litigious. If we have a panel of people, it will just be one court case after the next court case. So whatever rules we come up with, we have to come up with a fairly simple and straightforward solution. And the good news is that FINA, which is the Swimming Federation, are about to release some new rules, I think in April, May time. So we're all hoping that they're going to be very different.
Because, of course, if we can understand from a human perspective that if you are someone who has been through a transitional process, who feels like that's something you need to do in order to be happy, and you're also a vocational sports person, well, you would want to continue to race, and you would want to race in the category that you feel is most appropriate to you. So from a level of compassion and empathy, we understand that, right? Is that a fair point?
Yes, absolutely. And I don't think you'll find anybody in sport is transphobic, or anybody in sport wants to exclude anybody. They just want to try to create fair sport. And fair sport would not allow people that have gone through male puberty to race females and it be fair in any shape or form. And so far, I think there's been 14 peer-reviewed studies, and not a single one of those have shown that we can mitigate against the advantage that comes with male puberty. So you mentioned, the fact that we try very hard to catch drug cheats. And those are people that are trying to shave off, 1 or 2%. And we spend millions every year trying to catch those people. We banned shoes from the men's competition, or from all of the competition, but obviously it was going to affect the men's competition because it was going to give somebody an advantage. So the moment it affects men's competition, things are done to create a level playing field. When it affects women's competition, nobody seems to care. And I suppose that's what gets me very, very irked, and why I speak so loudly, because this happened before for 20 years. And I just don't want to see another generation of young girls go through the same thing.
Well, a lot of people are very grateful for you for speaking out. Sharron Davies, thank you so much for joining me today.